The idea of the critic in fashion and the
Yeah.
relevance of the critic is something problematic right now because we know that we need criticism in order to get better, but we don't know where to place these people. And how does the critic matter today? And I'm saying this because brands are, as we know, as very powerful. They're incredibly powerful, and they've acquired territory that they never used to have before. So they're everywhere. I mean, fashion now is a mass discourse. It talks to everyone.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the world of AI, fashion, and more, brought to you by AI Aesthetic. I'm your host, Duncan, and this is the show where I interview AI experts, e-commerce, and fashion leaders who share their stories and insights to help you learn and grow your e-commerce business faster. So subscribe now on Apple or Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. In this episode, I interview Philippe Pourhashemi, editor-at-large at Fucking Young and journalistic contributor. Philippe is a fashion journalist, editor, influencer, and mentor to fashion designers. In this episode, we dive into a number of important questions and topics in fashion right now. The importance of authenticity. Is enough being done on sustainability and inclusivity in fashion? Why are fashion journalists holding back criticism? What needs to happen to change this? And how has reality TV affected fashion and its purpose? This episode is packed full of thought-provoking thinking and offers an inside take on the state of fashion, where it's heading, and what should be done. Enjoy. Philippe, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you on the show. So just to kick us off, do you have a favorite quote or something that motivates or inspires you that you could share with us?
It's actually quite a funny one. It's one of Coco Chanel's famous quotes, where she said, "I don't care what you think about me. I don't think about you at all."
Brilliant.
Which, is a very good one to bear in mind when you work in the fashion industry. And it might not be so inspirational, but at the same time, it's very accurate when reflecting the reality of that business. So yeah, I like that one.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay. And just for those that are not so familiar with your expertise and background, could you tell us a little bit about what you do, who's it for, what are the problems, or what are the things that you're helping to kind of solve or address?
So I work as an independent coach and fashion writer, fashion freelance writer, which means that I contribute to various magazines, sometimes as an editor, sometimes as a pure journalist. And when I coach, I help young designers develop their business, and I bring them all sorts of, advice, expertise, business practice, because I've been in this industry for almost 25 years now. And I work with institutions, I work with private companies, and I work with media titles, publications. Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. Now, and you referenced this as a writer, contributor. I mean, before we get into Fucking Young, contributor, and all of that great stuff, I just want to go back to it's always interesting, how people start, doing what they do, and what inspired you for a career in fashion and fashion journalism.
It's kind of strange in a way because there were no connections in my family to that world. I grew up in Paris, and I received like a sort of normal education, standard school education. And my parents were not exactly creative people, and we didn't know anybody involved in the fashion industry. But at the same time, Paris has always been a place where a lot of things were happening fashion-wise. So for me, when I was growing up as a teenager, fashion was a dream, but it didn't feel like something I could be part of. It felt like a very um, kind of a very exclusive, detached world, very far away from my own life. And then I left France when I was 17 to study in Glasgow in the UK. And I worked part-time for a store called Cruise. At that time, they used to be in a partnership with Flannels, which is another English company. And I started to learn about the business there. So it was really like a part-time job. And the owner of the company spotted me and took me to Paris for the buying trips. So that was really my first contact, direct contact with the industry. Yeah.
Wow. Wow. So yeah, quite a journey and yeah, and quite a jump, as you say, without a kind of I suppose family or colleagues involved in the fashion industry. So as you kind of think about and I think what's really interesting to some of our listeners is your perspective. You know,
Mhm.
having been in the industry for a considerable amount of time and writing and contributing and working with designers, how do you stay on top of it? You know, how do you stay on top of the latest trends in an industry that is continually kind of evolving, changing, and I think above everything else, creating?
That's a very good question. I think you need to feel what's happening before it even takes place. I think, I'm not going to say I have psychic abilities, but almost, and I think in fashion it really helps because fashion is all about predicting the future and what's going to happen in the future and creating desire for something that we haven't seen yet. So that's definitely part of the work. And you have to sort of try to anticipate what fashion needs and where fashion needs to go, which at the moment is quite confusing. We're living a very confusing moment post-pandemic. It's very difficult to know what shall we embrace. Shall we embrace sustainability? Shall we have less product? Shall we focus on local businesses? Shall we change completely the ways we do fashion? And I think, these are definitely strong debates that people have been engaged in for the past 3 years. Although I have to say that the pandemic for me represented an opportunity. And when I see what's happening in fashion today, I'm a bit disappointed.
Well, that's interesting. Yeah. So when you say opportunity, yeah, tell us a little bit about how that particular period in time, which I think was, of course, incredibly unique and impactful for all of us. But
Back in 2020, it was very difficult for me to do my job. First of all, because I couldn't see anyone physically.
yeah,
So I couldn't have face-to-face meetings with people. A lot of designers were scared about talking because they didn't know what the future was holding. So, there was
mm,
this kind of fear of not knowing where to go. And at the same time, there was this willingness to reconsider an industry that has had a very negative impact on the environment, as we all know, and
yeah,
to maybe think about different cycles and to get away from this fast fashion frenzy to embrace something that was much more humane and much more manageable. And, it gave me a lot of hope because I thought, okay, once the pandemic is over, we are really going to change things. And it's fashion amnesia. I mean, now we see celebrities, journalists, and buyers being flown across the world as far as Seoul for a Louis Vuitton show. We see people being flown over to faraway locations for other types of brands. And I'm just thinking, okay, we have learned absolutely nothing. And it's still about profit. It's still about trying to get as much as they can from talent, from designers, sucking them dry. And if you
mm,
see lately, there are a lot of people leaving. I mean, Alessandro Michele left Gucci, which was a
yeah,
very signal. Other designers are leaving now. It's a very unstable environment. And I think it also raises questions about the role of the designer today. I mean, Pharrell Williams has been promoted new artistic director of Louis Vuitton Men's,
yeah,
which is a huge shift.
yeah,
It's basically an artist and a celebrity that is promoted to lead a fashion brand, a luxury fashion brand. So it's becoming very, very blurry, compared to what we used to know as fashion and what we understood as being fashion. And the other interesting thing I would say is that with social media, we also see new voices rising and we see critical voices that could not exist within the magazines because magazines are ruled by advertisers. So we also see interesting voices coming from the internet, challenging the status quo, challenging the system. So that's also exciting in a way. There's a lot of contention in fashion right now, and it's a field of power. So you're going to have people fighting for what they think great fashion is.
Well, it's fascinating. Actually, I hadn't really reflected on it in that way, but you're absolutely right when you think about it. This kind of, I suppose, the model of magazines and advertisement that then drives a certain opinion. You
Mhm.
throw in social media, and as you say, that just opens up that freedom and that voice. So what I guess thinking about that, what should thinking about that opportunity, which as you say is perhaps you're saying could have been missed, but there's also ongoing kind of contention right now.
Mhm.
What should those voices be saying in your eyes?
I believe that they should be very critical of the fashion industry. I believe that, there are too many brands today. I mean, I'm not the only one who says that in
Yeah,
fashion. There are far too
yeah,
many brands, too many designers, too many fashion weeks, too many people producing clothes, which at the end of the day do not carry much meaning. And I think what is very difficult in our business is to regulate all of this, because how do you say to somebody who wants to launch their own brand, well, sorry, you're not meaningful enough, or you're not good enough, or you're
yeah.
not going to make it more than 3 seasons. So how do we regulate that? And that's what's really hard with sustainability and fashion in general. Fashion is about desire. It's about creating desire for something that we didn't know we wanted. And that desire is not always sustainable. So that's one thing which is tricky. And also fashion relies on the new. It relies on novelty, on surprises, unexpected things. And at the moment, we're missing, I think, innovation uh, from all kinds of fields, especially when it comes to a design. Yeah.
That's fascinating. This kind of your the tension point that you mentioned. And interestingly, so we're talking a little bit about sustainability. Could you give us another, I suppose, another area which I think is really topical is sizing and inclusivity around sizing.
Yes.
What should the voices be saying, or where do you stand on that? Where's the debate, and where do you think the debate should go on it?
There are designers who are very strongly and aggressively promoting size inclusivity. So, for example, in Brussels, we have Esther Manas, who is a great women's wear designer. She shows her collections in Paris. She's part of the official calendar. And all her models are basically curvy, beautiful women, very powerful, very strong. And I think we couldn't have seen such shows 5 years ago. So there's definitely something changing. But at the same time, the designers like her are still, outsiders in a way. They're not big household names. So
Mm,
what needs to change is, larger brands doing the same thing. And sometimes I feel that, there's going to be one or two larger models in the show, and it reeks of tokenism.
yeah.
It's not enough. And I think you either embrace it because it's your philosophy, or you continue using very, very skinny models, which, still a lot of designers do to this day. I mean, they still do it, and they get away with it. No.
Mm. So what do you think will prompt, do you think so from what I'm hearing, you're sort of saying, well, we haven't reached that point which will prompt that kind of dramatic change because we haven't seen it yet in the kind of big brands. But what do you think, what can you see as kind of the ways of changing that?
There needs to be somebody extremely powerful who imposes diversity, size, inclusivity, and all these things as standards. You need somebody very strong, very influential in the industry, and then everybody else will copy, because it's also a world of copycats. So that's how it goes. When someone comes to the fore with power and says, okay, this is how it needs to be done, then things change. I don't know if you remember recently, but James Scully um, gave a very moving talk at the Business of Fashion about abuse in modeling and what some models were exposed to. And
Mm.
this really had a huge impact, also thanks to social media. And then LVMH and Kering decided to work together, which never happens, to create a chart, for models, for modeling rights. So this is what happens with one person who basically talks about their experience, and that can change the industry. So I think to answer your question, we need powerful people who are going to be listened to, and they will challenge the system, definitely.
So it is possible. I think I hear a hint of, reality, like optimism based on some recent, events of what you're seeing and feeling, I guess. Is that fair?
Yeah, it is possible. At the same time, you always have people who are going to cling to their power and cling to their old ways of doing things. So it's a tension, as we said earlier, between these two things, between people who want to reject that and who want to move on and who want to come up with something new, and others that are perpetuating old ideas. And this is where we are right now, I think, in the fashion industry.
Fascinating. So I think and if you think about some of the people that are listening to this podcast, they might be running, some e-commerce based fashion brands, and thinking about their business, their designs. What advice would you give them to tackle some of these issues? How can they start, or what would you recommend that they go ahead and do? How could they play a role?
I think one thing that is really important at the moment is being genuine and being authentic. I think this is something that people really respond to because, a lot of things in fashion are fabricated. It's about hype, it's about buzz, it's about celebrity. It's so this vacant culture. And I think a lot of consumers are rejecting this and they're looking for something that is more sincere, more genuine. So I think that would say that's the first thing, to
Yeah.
really be personal and be honest with what you want to offer, to really be as transparent as possible as well. I think transparency is actually a virtue, and it's also a value that's gaining currency in fashion today. The second thing is to have a very strong story, because today it's not enough to sell a product. You need to sell ideas, values. It's almost a way to think, a way to look at the world. And I think a brand should carry this today. It should come up with a series of values, a series of opinions. I think also being politically committed is a great thing, brands. I think, that's also something that surprisingly people respond to really well. And yeah, not be fearless. Don't be scared to come up with strong ideas, and be honest to yourself. No.
Yeah, that's really helpful. I mean, it really, yeah, helpful and clear kind of advice, which instinctively feels very relevant. And now, given just what you described earlier, I guess one thing which kind of struck me, the first point you mentioned around authenticity and realness, and just something you mentioned, there feels like there's a little bit of a kind of tension there in fashion, in the sense of this trend that we're seeing around, particularly some younger consumers and people. They seek out this authenticity, this purpose, as you said, these values. And
Mhm.
fashion has also, as you alluded to, sold this kind of desire and dream and aspiration, which is not always like, that's not always rooted in that kind of realness or authenticity, is it? There's,
It's not, and I think you touched on something very, very important today when it comes to the fashion landscape. It's this idea that certain people have in the industry of fashion as entertainment, as spectacle. It's a bit of a circus. You have to
yes.
news people, you have to entertain them on social media, you have to come up with outrageous creations, you have to shout louder than others. And at the end of the day, the reality behind those brands is that they're selling other things. They're selling perfume, they're selling shoes, they're selling accessories. They're not really selling clothing. So I definitely realized last March in Paris during the women's wear shows that there was a clear divide between the designers that, as I said earlier, wanted to make actual, intricate, beautiful clothing, and others who just wanted to join the circus, and
Yeah.
to make pure entertainment. And in a way, I'm not saying that fashion shouldn't be entertaining. I think it can be, but to reduce it to pure entertainment is also not okay. So we need to find a balance between that and being farcical and being ridiculous and being grotesque. And another thing I will talk about, which I find really interesting, is the invasion of reality TV into fashion. Because when you see the Hadid sisters, for example, being on Netflix with a fashion program, then strutting down the runways together, you realize that, and the clothing becomes strangely similar, from the TV shows to the
Yes.
catwalks. You start thinking, okay, what's going on here? And it's almost this invasion of reality TV into fashion. And I find that very, very bizarre. What's happening with that, because this is a new situation that we didn't have before.
Mm. Yeah, for sure, for sure. And
I
and,
mean,
and I guess it,
for
yeah.
example, Kim Kardashian is a fashion icon today, which I totally disagree with, but at the same time, that's what she is. And a lot of brands are fighting to work with her. Where does she come from? She comes from reality TV. So it's almost this obsession with fame, this obsession with being acknowledged, with being recognized, with this, this kind of almost desperation to be famous. And I think some designers have that too. It's about being famous. Yeah.
That's right. And it's not, it's kind of actually, in my eyes, it takes away from the elevation that fashion
From
can
the
bring.
craft, of
Yeah,
course.
and
Yes.
from the craft and the realness of the craft,
Yeah.
but then the elevation that comes from that craft, which is the
Yeah.
feeling of empowerment and positivity and confidence and elegance that
That's
can
the
come.
aspirational part. I mean, it's the part that,
Absolutely.
fashion, I totally agree with you. It's about elevation, it's about dreams, it's about enhancement, it's about a better version of ourselves. It's about the possibility of a better future, even, in a way. And I think a lot of fashion has been very dystopian lately. I mean, if you look at Balenciaga and what Demna has made it's a very dark dystopian vision. And I think that also reflects some of the concerns that we all share today regarding the future. What sort of
Yeah.
future are we going to leave, and what sort of future are we going to have for future, for other generations? So I think, yeah, it's definitely an issue right now. This sort of, what is your camp? Are you there do you want to be part of the circus, or do you want to be a serious designer? What is it that you want to do? How do you want to exist? And yeah, so that's a big debate, I think, right now.
Fascinating. Well, let me add in. This is really interesting and fascinating. I want to add in another topic, which is AI, and in the context of creativity. Will AI? Do you think AI will help or hinder creativity? Where do you stand on that? How is it going to affect
Yeah,
where we
for me,
go?
it's still difficult to understand where it's going to go and what kind of behaviors it's going to create. Because in a way, another thing with in fashion right now is this sort of like desire to be involved with what's real. And what I mean by that is that, for example, haute couture, which is the highest form of fashion, if you want, it's the top craftsmanship, is having a renaissance right now. And there are more and more clients, extremely wealthy clients, buying it. And I think, in a way, the more digitized our landscape is, the more we crave the work of the hand, the imperfections of the hands. And recently, I was visiting the Le Sage Atelier. They've been acquired by Chanel a few years ago. And I was amazed by their figures and how there's been an increase in demand for embroidered dresses, which are extremely expensive, but the client worships that kind of dressmaking. So I think there's something really, we want to exist virtually and we want to develop this, but at the same time we are clinging to what is material and what is physical. So I think it's kind of interesting. At the same time, there doesn't need to be a divide between the two. They can probably serve each other, and help each other.
And coexist. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And when you look at fashion journalism, then what's the, I guess, in light of AI and some of the challenges and social media, actually, we talked about voices. What's the role, or what do you think the role of the fashion journalist and fashion journalism will be?
Well, I'm hoping that there will be more critical voices and opinions because right now I don't see many of those. And I see a lot of people basically just, I mean, I'm going to be quite rude here, but just kissing ass, kissing ass to the brands, kissing ass to the advertisers, the designers, and just not not being truthful and not giving their actual opinions and serving the brands. And I think it's quite sad in a way because you can tell, I can tell when I read an article if it's there to promote the brand or if the
Yeah.
journalist really has a point of view and is going to stand by it. So the idea of the critic in fashion and the
Yeah.
relevance of the critic is something problematic right now because we know that we need criticism in order to get better, but we don't know where to place these people. And they're also disturbing things in a way. I mean, they're shaking things off. So where do we place the critic and how does the critic matter today? And I'm saying this because brands are, as we know, as very powerful. They're incredibly powerful. And they've acquired territory that they never used to have before. So they're everywhere. I mean, fashion now is a mass discourse. It talks to everyone. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm really curious, actually, just to sort of ask you a little bit more about that, because why do you think that is the case, that we are not seeing that the kind of level of criticism and that kind of kissing? So why are we seeing so much kissing ass right now? What are the dynamics?
I think it's fear. It's fear of being called out, fear of having a strong opinion and being abandoned by others or being, ignored by others. I think it's fashion. There's a lot of politics in fashion and there's a lot of diplomacy. And with
Yeah.
diplomacy, you don't necessarily say what you think, or you
Mm.
have to read between the lines. So it's always been a field where giving your honest opinion can be problematic, you know? So nobody wants to upset nobody else, but at the same time, you cannot evolve as a person if you don't get constructive and critical feedback. So I find myself sometimes in situations that are very strange, with PRs, because I'm openly critical on my social media, and then they still
Yeah.
invite me to shows, and I wonder why. And I wonder how long I'm going to be able to be this way before they completely like block me from that access. So it's sort of weird because I think in a way, once you said what you were thinking and once people respect your opinion, then they may look at you differently. I think, as I said earlier, always being nice to everyone is not the best way to get your own reputation. I don't know. It's a strange one, but I think there are a lot of lies in fashion, and there are a lot of things that are unsaid and untold, and a lot
And
of untruths as well. Yeah.
yeah, and from but I'm gleaning particularly that it's kind of acute now, right? Versus, is that versus, I don't know, pre-pandemic or even predating. And
Mhm.
that's the curious thing, I suppose, is what's prompting this. And is it a case of, as we talked about a bit earlier, you've got essentially voices within, in inverted commas, the establishment,
Mhm.
that's linked to kind of advertising, and then it's almost like the outside that tent is kind of the dissenting voices.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, really, yeah,
Yeah.
interesting. So
And, you know,
why that's happening now? Because arguably you could say, well, social media actually has empowered people to actually to break that.
Definitely. And I will tell you, I sometimes have comments on my Instagram posts where people say, "Oh, thank you for saying this," or "Oh, I wanted to express it, but I couldn't find the right words to say it." And it's always bizarre when, in a way, you become a voice for somebody else that they praise you for this because they feel that you've managed to articulate something that they were thinking, but maybe they didn't dare to say it. And I became more radical after the pandemic, actually. It made me more radical and it made me more upset to see certain things in fashion that I thought were unfair. For example, we talk about inclusivity and we talk about diversity, but there's still a lot of nepotism in fashion.
Yeah.
There are sons and daughters of God knows who are getting great jobs very easily because they are privileged and because they have
Mm.
connections and because they come from families connected to fashions. And I'm very aware of this, being in fashion myself and not having any connections to that world when I was growing up. So it's a funny thing, it is a very privileged and elitist field. So sometimes I wonder, this whole play about, oh, fashion is for everybody, it's democratic, everybody gets dressed, etc. I mean, is this real? Is this actually true? Or are there still the same people pulling the strings, behind the curtains? Like, it's an interesting one because when you start digging into, you realize that it's always the same people who are in power and they're desperately hanging on to it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Wow. Okay. So let me, it's a big topic, big topic. But I wanted to, so just to sort of really curious and would love to hear your perspective as you look at your career to date, and you've been exposed and been part of numerous events, campaigns, activities, and what are some of the lessons that you've learned along the way, having worked in fashion and fashion journalism these last years?
Hmm. Um, it's in a way it's very hard because fashion is an industry where if you become too confident, then you are complacent. And if you are complacent, you're going to lose your place. So you always need to question yourself. You can never be too sure of yourself. And I think that's primarily because it's a creative industry. So you can never rest on your laurels, and nothing is stable. At the same time, I find with my experience that, it becomes easier for me to assert what I want, to find the people who share my values that I can work with. And actually, a lot of times they are younger than me, which is very interesting. They are in their 20s or early 30s. So, you have to renew yourself. You have to sort of update yourself, but it sort of happens naturally because if your discourse is the same as another person, then you're going to meet up and you're going to find that you have a lot in common. So it's a business of relationships. It's a business of friendships. It's a business of connections. And you meet people and they open the door to you. And that's one thing I wanted to say when I was going back to my student days is that, when I went to Paris for the first time as an assistant buyer, I had no idea what was going on and why I had been chosen. But I guess the owner of the company must have seen something on my face that I wasn't even aware of myself. But I think that's also what it is. It's like other people see that you have it and they take you on board and they want to develop you or they want your opinion, you know? And it's funny because being older today, I realize that it's the same when I talk to younger designers. And when I coach them, I learn a lot more probably than what they learn from me. So it's always this kind of like back and forth dialogue. And I think that's what makes my job really, really fascinating.
Wow, that's an amazing lesson. This kind of idea of renewal and learning, and yeah, through discourse and ideas. So yeah, that's
And what is nice today, I have to say, is when somebody who is a YouTuber or someone who has like a huge following on Instagram comes up to me at a fashion show and says, "Oh, I really like your post," or "What do you
Yeah.
think about this?" or "I'd like to include you in this." And it's nice. Then you realize that you're not the only one, and that there are people who think alike in your industry. And I think social media really, really helps for this, because sometimes you do feel a bit lonely having to face whatever you have to face in your job. So social media gives you that bond with other people.
Fantastic. Well, we could keep talking, Philippe. It feels for hours, but we are going to have to wrap a little bit the constraints of time. So I wanted to kind of conclude with a few quick questions and just give us your instinctive reactions. That'll be often insightful and interesting to hear. So I suppose to start, what's one of the best pieces of advice that you've received?
Um, I think to learn to listen, to truly learn to listen. And I think, being a journalist, it's something that I learned also throughout the years. I think being an active listener and really really embracing someone's story and being generous with them that way is very important. And I think when I coach designers, of course, listening is so important. So being a good listener. Yeah.
Fantastic. What book would you recommend to our audience to read, and why?
Does it have to be a book on fashion or not necessarily?
No, not necessarily. Just, yeah.
Well, there is one book that I devoured like within 2 days that I loved. It's The Beautiful Fall. It's a book that traces the rivalry between Karl Lagerfeld and Yves Saint Laurent. And Lagerfeld tried to get the book banished for years in France, and eventually he failed. I can't remember the writer now, unfortunately, but it's called The Beautiful Fall, and it's a fascinating book about that period. It's mostly focused on the 70s, and it's about Lagerfeld and Saint Laurent and how they were always there was always this rivalry, and they also shared a boyfriend in common, so it got even weirder. But yeah, it's a great book. Yeah.
Fantastic. What's your favorite item of clothing that you own?
It's bags because I love bags. I love the way they are made, constructed. I would say it's a bag that I have from Hermes. It's called Le Bolide, and actually it's a bag that this year is celebrating its 100th anniversary. And it's a vintage bolide. It's a large size in blue jean denim. The color is this sort of denim blue, but it's leather. It's basically, yeah, that's my favorite. Yeah.
Nice. And why?
I think the craftsmanship is exquisite. The color is beautiful. I think Hermes really has special colors that no one else has. And also, I won it at auction, and it was a bargain. So I was really happy when I got it. And I think it's luxurious, but it's not ostentatious. And I think only people who really know about the brand know about this bag. So it's quite a special piece. Yeah.
Nice. What's an interesting or fun fact that other people would not know about you?
Oh God, that's quite difficult. Well, a lot of people tell me that I have a very calm um, demeanor, and that when, for example, I go to fashion weeks and they sit next to me for hours on end, and we look at shows, and I'm always very quiet and I'm always relaxed and everything. So also because of my physical appearance, like I'm quite big and I'm sort of bearish, and people associate me a little bit with this kind of teddy bear comfort thing. But deep down, I'm not relaxed at all. I'm actually very anxious and quite stressed out, but they don't really see that. No, a lot of people don't know that about me. No.
Oh, okay. And finally, what's one of one of the most important kind of passions outside of your work?
I would say traveling. Traveling is really something that keeps me excited. I love being in a different environment. I love discovering new cultures. Thanks to my job, I could travel to places such as Kazakhstan or Ethiopia, really to discover fashion there, to discover what was going on there. And I think that's a gift that I was able to do it in the conditions that I did. So traveling is definitely a passion of mine, and also traveling not for work. It doesn't have to be for work. I would,
Yeah.
yeah.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Philippe. I've really enjoyed this conversation. I think we've covered, found it really, really interesting and above all, enjoyable. If some of our listeners, if they wanted to get in touch with you, what's the best way of doing that if they wanted to reach
I
out?
would say follow me on Instagram. My account
Yeah.
is fashionist76.
Yeah.
Or you can just type my name and you will find me, and that's the best way to reach out now. I think Instagram is fantastic that way, and I answer everybody. So feel free feel free to add me. Yes.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much, Philippe. As I said, it's been a
Duncan.
blast. I've thoroughly enjoyed it.
Me
And
too.
I hope we'll speak again soon. I'm sure
All
we
right.
will.
Thank you
Take
so much.
care.
Take care. Have a great weekend. Thank you, Duncan.
Bye-bye.